Okay, we are live.
And I will call to order this meeting of the Finance Committee for City of Salem for June 16, 2025. You can start with roll call. Who are you? I'm Chair Deanna Gwynn.
I'm Julie Boy.
Counselor Paul Tigan.
Counselor Vanessa Nordyke.
Shane Matthews alternate.
Linda.
Member of the public.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Staff.
Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer.
Relationship Management Analyst.
James Worthington in the Budget Office.
Dan Atchison, City Attorney.
Krishna Moody's. I'm our Budget Manager.
Courtney Knox-Bush, and I'm your Chief Strategy Officer.
I'm Gretchen Bennett, Acting Incapacity Community Services Director.
Marilyn Daly Blair, Director of Center Plus. Linda Nishio, City Councilor, not alternate, just here.
Welcome. We're glad you're here. Did everyone have an opportunity to review the minutes from the meeting of May 19th? And if so, we need a motion, please.
I would move to approve the minutes from May 19th.
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Do we have anyone for public comment? No public comment, no action items, so we have a management update and information item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have the Community Services User Fee Study that's been underway for quite a while. It was envisioned last year after the Revenue Task Force was underway looking at our user fees for community services. I mentioned it during the fee adoption this last month. And we have our consultant, Matrix, here who's going to do the presentation, but also James Horton-Hess, analyst in the budget office, is going to do a follow-up presentation. James, do you want to do any introduction before that, or just turn it right over to Matrix?
Yeah, this is Khushbu Ingol with Matrix Consulting, so I think she'll take it from here.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. I will be sharing my screen and giving a brief presentation on the Community Services Cost of Services User Fee Study results. So just a brief background, the purpose of these fee studies is to take a look at the fee structure, get an understanding of, do we have all the appropriate services represented on the fee schedule? Are there things that we're missing? Are there things that we're adding? Are there things that are outdated that are no longer relevant? The city does kind of do a comprehensive review on its end every year. So there wasn't a lot of streamlining that we needed to do through this process, but we still wanted to take a look at that, make sure everything was reflective. As part of this, we wanted to look at collecting some time assumptions. So kind of how long does it take to provide the different level of services and activities on the fee schedule? With recreation and community services, there is a lot of unique aspects beyond just the time that it takes to provide those services. There is that market rate component as well, but we wanted to make sure that at a minimum we understood, what is the staff time and effort? What is the city's costs associated with providing those services? So looking at the time assumptions, but also looking at from a market perspective, what is the use of space? What's the cost of amenities? Those types of items. And then taking a look at what the fully burdened cost is for staff. So taking into account any kind of direct costs, so your salaries, your benefits, but also taking into account any indirect costs. So, citywide overhead support, departmental overhead support. And then ultimately coming up with a consolidated fee schedule that, listed all of the different fees for service, kind of what the different rates are, so that everybody kind of transparently is aware of what that is. Again, the city already does this on an annual basis, but just making sure that any changes that occurred as a result of this study, we're still able to present. And then taking all of this information together and looking at it in the context of, what are those cost recovery goals? What are those cost recovery targets? With recreation and community services, it is a little bit unique. Compared to some of the other city functions and departments, in that, because they are market-based, they are market-driven, achieving full cost recovery is not always the goal. there is also this level of community benefit that we need to weigh. So taking a look at it and making sure that as we're looking at the different services, we're not just saying, oh, everything needs to go to full cost recovery, but what makes the most sense for each service type and what is that ultimate benefit to the community for those different service areas. So there's two components when we looked at calculating the total cost through the study. So we looked at the staff time and effort, like I mentioned, and for that, we took a look at, what is the average staff time that it takes to process that type of permit, to process that type of application, to process the different rentals, to run the different tournaments, to run the different leagues, and then multiplying it by the fully burdened hourly rate. And like I mentioned, the fully burdened rate doesn't just take into account your salaries, but your salaries, your benefits, your productive working hours. It also takes into account any sort of departmental supplies and services that you need to provide those services, any internal departmental overhead, so supervisory, manager level, administrative support, and any citywide overhead. So it's really the fully loaded cost of that position to provide the service. So it's not just their straight salary rate. So that's one component that's really kind of the fixed cost, so to speak, the staff cost. We then take a look at, what's that use cost of the space that we're looking at. So if we're renting a field, if we're running a tournament, if we're, renting a facility, if we're renting open space, kind of what is that market rate for the use of that space? Because again, we're through this process, when you're renting that space, you're really kind of asking for exclusive use of that space. And generally speaking, that space would be available to the rest of the community. But right now, because you're renting it, you're setting it aside for that exclusive use. So trying to take into account what the cost of that exclusive use is. So making sure that we're looking at, what is that typical current rate from the market standpoint within the city for utilizing that space. So we take that cost of that space and we look at, what is the size of the space that we're looking at, whether it's square footage based, acreage based, and then how many anticipated uses are we intended to covering through that space. So if we're, looking at, typically this space gets rented, every weekend, or this space gets used once a month. So taking a look at, what is that average use of space to come up with that total space use component. So again, we come up with that staff cost, then we come up with that space use component, and together both of those components get added to create kind of the fully loaded cost of providing the different services. Ultimately, when we looked at it, overall, the cost recovery is roughly around 69%. Taking a look at the different services within community services, the typical cost recovery we typically see for recreation related services is between 20 and 50. So the city right now at 69% is above that. So good job. But as you can see, kind of varies by service area. So looking at some of the more youth-based services, they're at 35% cost recovery. So they're kind of right there between that 20 and 50%. But then something like parks, which is much more rental and market-driven, is much higher cost recovery, again, which we would anticipate seeing because there is that ability to charge the market rate for it more than even just the cost incurred by the city. And that's a really important component to keep in mind, that when we're looking at the costs incurred by the city, we're just taking a look at kind of the tangible cost that we can quantify. We can't quantify the intangible components of a facility or of a space. The fact that, certain facilities might have better amenities, their location is a prime location within the city, those types of components, that's hard to put a dollar value on it. So it's unfortunately not possible to say, there's this X factor that we can apply for capturing those intangible components. But that is why, certain times when we look at these studies, we see that over recovery, quote unquote, on those types of services, because it's the city's way of trying to capture those intangible components and making sure that everybody understands that, these are highly desirable places to rent, highly desirable locations. And so we want to make sure that we are charging an appropriate market rate and not just kind of giving away those services for free. So when we looked at kind of the surrounding jurisdictions, we, kind of broke it down into the 4 major areas that we looked at. So generally speaking, when we looked at the Center 50 plus, right now the city's classes ranges from $6 to $40, but the full cost is closer to $13 to $92. Whereas when we look at the survey jurisdictions, they're much more in alignment with your current range, which is, roughly $7 to $16. So kind of, even though it might cost a bit more, right now, the city's current fees are kind of much more in alignment with the other jurisdictions from a classes standpoint. From a rental standpoint, roughly fairly similar for Center 50 plus. Again, the fees, kind of range currently depending on, what group is renting, what space you're renting. But again, the full cost is a little bit higher than what you're currently charging. And your neighboring jurisdictions kind of fall right there in between your current fee and your full cost. So there is that kind of capacity and ability to charge differently. From the library standpoint, again, the cost of the cards range currently, but the full cost, again, is a little bit on the higher end from the current fees. However, the survey jurisdictions actually charge a little bit more. So again, there's greater capacity to increase that. And then from the rentals, what's interesting is, we did look at costing those out, and right now the cost is a little bit lower than what the library is currently charging, but the survey jurisdictions actually typically don't charge for library rentals. This is a little bit complicated because depending on the jurisdiction, there is a philosophical decision to not charge for library rentals sometimes because it depends on who the users are. A lot of times when we've talked with libraries in other jurisdictions, they're typically, the spaces are being rented by, students who are trying to do study groups and things like that. And so they're not really going to charge rental fees. So that's why they don't have rental fees listed on there. So that's why sometimes we see that where depending on who your user is for those spaces, you may end up not charging for those fees. From a recreational program standpoint, again, the comparison kind of varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but your current fees and your full costs for camps fall right within the range of what other cities are charging and districts are charging. Same thing from a league standpoint. Again, your current fees kind of fall right in within that range. Parks field rentals, looking at that same kind of thing where the current fees are a little bit closer to what the jurisdictions are charging, but there is still that capacity to increase closer to the full cost depending on kind of what you're targeting. And same thing for the open space. So there's a lot of information in comparison. It varies a lot. There's different rates depending on whether you're a resident, non-resident, nonprofit, if you have agreements with different groups. So again, a lot of this is meant to be more generalized information that we've provided here in this slide, but there are details that we have included in the report. Kind of looking at ultimately as a result of this, when we're looking at developing those cost recovery goals, we want to take into account multiple components, such as, again, who's benefiting from it, what types of alternate funding sources do we have for those services? Is it going to have some sort of equity impact if we make the fees too high for those services? What are those cost recovery goals and what can the market bear? So kind of looking at it, we worked with staff to determine, what's the appropriate target for those areas. So something like library and Center 50 plus, it was determined, it's closer to 50% is an appropriate range. For youth services and recreation, again, lower, kind of that 35%. It's a much stronger benefit to the community. We really want to make sure that those services are accessible. Whereas for adults, the goal was closer to 100% because, again, that's something, this is a voluntary fee. You're choosing to participate in these community services, classes, programs, activities, leagues. So again, there should be kind of that full cost recovery that can be obtained by the city. And when we're looking at parks, it was decided to be closer to 50%. So again, the approach that the city and staff are kind of taking, and I'm sure James is kind of go into more detail with this, is when we look at library and Center 50 plus, if the current fee showed a cost recovery of less than 35%, it would increase by 10%. If their cost recovery was between 35 and 50%, the cost recovery level would increase to 50%. And then if the fees were already at greater than 50% cost recovery, then those fee amounts would only increase by 3%. When it comes to recreation, any fees that were below 35%, the goal was to get them to 35% cost recovery, kind of that target. If they were already at the 35% or above 35%, then the goal was just to increase them by 3%. And kind of that 3% factor is that annual inflation factor. For adult same kind of concept. If the fee was below 100%, because the goal was 100% cost recovery, you would get them to that 100% cost recovery level. But if they were already at or above 100% cost recovery, then you would only increase them by that annual inflation factor. From a park standpoint, we would want to increase fees that were less than 50%, again, to that 50% cost recovery level to meet that target, and anything that was already greater than 50%, kind of keeping it at that annual inflationary increase factor. So that was kind of the proposed goal through this study, was to ultimately take a look at, what are the costs that the city is incurring for providing these services? And then when we look at it from a big picture standpoint, what do we ultimately do with this information to help the city achieve those tangible cost recovery goals? And with that, I will stop my presentation, and I believe, James, you have more to add on.
Yeah, thank you, Kushbu.
James, for the record, our librarian, and I forgot your name, joined the meeting. Bridget. Thank you.
Sure.
No, you didn't hit save or share. Now you are.
All right, for the record, James Wharton Hess. I am an analyst in the budget office, and so I just wanted to follow Kushbu's presentation with sort of the next steps for this. First off, we'll be coming back with a formal recommendation to sort of adopt what Matrix presented, with a few exceptions that I'm going to walk through in a second. And then eventually we would hope for a motion to forward it to City Council for approval.
Just real quick, James, one of the reasons this is important, but not quite important right now, is that the rec season's really underway. So we're really talking about fees for the next season, not this upcoming one. So there's no urgency to get it adopted July 1st or anything like that. We're talking about the next season.
I do have a question. So I run a nonprofit that has historically rented park facilities. And is that a reason for me to declare a conflict and not participate in this conversation, City Attorney? I'm sorry, I'm just bringing this on you now.
Thank you for springing it on me, Councilor. Appreciate it. Always good to have these kind of questions in the middle of the meeting.
Right.
No, I apologize. No, I don't think it is, because a nonprofit is not considered a business under state ethics laws.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
There's more complications than that, but at most it's potential.
All right. Well, in that case, in the abundance of caution, I'll declare a potential conflict of interest because my nonprofit has rented city facilities. We have we have rented a space this Sunday, as a matter of fact. So, but we're one of God knows how many hundreds of organizations, individuals, nonprofits, and so on who use parks facilities from time to time. So just wanted to do that. Thank you.
All right, so I just wanted to start off by acknowledging that there's some timing challenges here. This report was based on the current fiscal year 2025 fee schedule. City Council has already adopted the FY 2026 fee schedule, and that did include some changes to community service rates. So there's a few different rates that we're sort of going back and forth here. So I just wanted to acknowledge that before we get started. So as a result of that, city staff does recommend keeping some of those rates at the higher level, which is the adopted 2026 rates. And those two are the non-resident library card fees. So the non-resident library card fees actually went up pretty steeply this round. So the fee study rates are actually lower than that, since they're based on the FY 2025 rates. And we just figured we'd keep it at the FY 2026 rates. And then the second one is this Riverfront Park North Meadow Boat Dock and Dock Overlook Monday through Thursday rate. That is actually $1 more currently than it is in the fee study. So we figured just keep the $1 additional fee. There's also ones that we would like to keep at the lower rate, but the currently adopted FY 2026 rate. The first one of those is the Minto Island fees. All of those fees are currently fully cost recovered. And there was a concern from staff that raising it more might disincentivize that use. So we just wanted to avoid those fees in particular. Two other ones that are sort of different are the court ordered community services fees. Typically, those are paid, I'm told, in cash, and the simple $40 is much easier to collect from them than the $47 or so that's recommended. And we also didn't want to disincentivize people from doing their community services here. And then the other one is the sundries use that was sort of never meant to be a cost recovery fee. We did include it in the fee study because we wanted to know how much it costs, but we certainly don't want to disincentivize that use. So we wanted to keep that at $0.
What is that?
It's sort of, Gretchen, do you know what that fee is?
Sure, I think that that relates to the opportunity for people to have an opportunity to hand out
Mhm.
like non-perishable food items, or with a commercial kitchen restaurant partnership, some sort of meal service. On occasion, we have to be careful about how frequently that happens in locations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the intent of that fee was always to track it and sort of be able to control it a little more, not necessarily for cost recovery. Another thing is the quick dry field products. Those are used for softball and kickball tournaments. We had been charging for 4 bags at a certain cost. We decided with the sort of cost recovery model that we chose to fully recoup that adult recreation, that it made more sense just to include that in the fee and not charge that cost. Well, that's sort of standard of business. And then there is now a fee for over 4 bags, so sort of more excessive use. And then finally, the softball and kickball tournament fees. Those fees were just, they just rose in the 2025 fee schedule pretty significantly. So there's a recommendation from staff to sort of, instead of 2 years of really steep increases, to sort of level that off and do the recommended fees in FY 2027 instead. So at least 2 years of sort of modest growth instead of 2 big ones. There was also some other changes that staff sort of recommended as part of this. And the first is the processing fee for lost and damaged items. Currently, people who lose or damage items do have to pay for those items plus the processing fee. Staff feels like $5 is a more fair fee than the $7, just because they do receive a discount on those replacement items that sort of can make up for that $2 variance.
This might be where I need to declare my potential conflict of interest on behalf of my children.
Thank you for your contribution.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The second thing is in recreation, park staff support for overtime and holiday. The suggestion was to fully recover that cost instead of using the standard recovery, just because that is a sort of significant burden on the department, and they felt like cost recovery, full cost recovery of that was a good idea. And then finally, the tennis tournaments for court rentals, that fee was sort of costed out through the normal formula, but city council policy is a 20% discount for nonprofits. So we just wanted to right size that to the for-profit cost just 20% less instead of using the methodology laid out by Keishbu earlier. And then finally, the softball kickball annual fee, that was a fee that was tried out last year. But sort of with full cost recovery again of softball and kickball, there doesn't seem to be a need for that fee anymore. And it was also, I think, pretty contentious in the softball kickball community. So staff recommended just waiving that and rolling it into the full cost.
Can you explain? I don't know what that fee was.
I think the intent was just to recover maybe more costs from non-residents than residents, but now that it's fully cost recovered, it's sort of.
At the team level?
At the team level, yes, correct for, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Can you explain contentious? Like what's?
I just think, I think staff sort of heard a lot of maybe negative feedback from those players that it was like really hard to track who's a resident, who's a non-resident, especially when they paid the full team fee. Then they'd have to pick out which team members of theirs were in Salem and not. It was just pretty difficult to pick in this group. Another pretty big change is kickball fees. Currently in the current fee schedule, they're softball fees and kickball fees. And staff wanted to take this opportunity to sort of merge them. So softball, it would be softball/kickball fees using the softball rates. And then the last one is free agent fees. So currently there's a fee for every sort of weeks and number of games for a full team, and then there's free agent fees. And they wanted to make sure that 12, which is the number of participants on either kickball or softball teams, times the free agent fee equals the full team fee. And so that just didn't naturally happen in the fee study, so we wanted to take the full fee divided by 12, and that would be the free agent fee. That makes sense. So yeah, I have a slide with, that's just a table of what all this means in dollars, but I won't subject you to that unless you want to be subjected to that. That's my presentation.
So James, what are you looking for next?
So yeah, for, I think this meeting, just questions, comments, concerns before we bring out back a formal recommendation for this committee.
Anybody have questions?
Yeah, I have a couple. If you want to go back to the not that library one, the lost, but just sort of, yeah, the resident card fees. There was one idea in the report, which the city of Eugene charges a non-resident library card fee that's essentially equivalent to the tax burden on the individual that goes towards the library. So if it's, I don't know, $12 a year or $100 a year or whatever it is, that's what they use as the basis for their non-resident library card holder. And I'll share, in my experience, sitting outside the library on a Sunday and asking people for their support for the library, whether it was the levy or the payroll tax before that. There's a lot of people who come to our library who aren't from Salem. And they were very happy to use the city services without paying for it, or if they pay it through this. But it seemed like at a time when we asked the community to invest in the library, it also seems like it makes sense to ask our non-resident users to invest in the library at the same rate. So I'm kind of curious if you guys have ever figured out like what a per capita cost burden is for the library, and how close is the charge that we ask people to pay for if they're going to come use the library but not live in the city.
So one quick thing, and then I'll see if Bridget has more. One thing that most people don't know, so if you live within the Chemeketa Community College Regional Library area, and you count a book at the Salem Library, Salem gets credit for that book. So we get more money from that tax rate that's taxed over that wider area because there's non-Salem residents checking out books at our library. So it's a little bit complicated. I'm not sure if the non-resident fee is that non-resident outside of Salem or non-resident outside of the CCRLS.
Outside of CCRLS, so anybody who doesn't live in Yamhill, Polk, or Marion.
So what we might be looking at is we probably have to do a calculation for within CCRLS, non-resident if you want to be the same as Salem, and then outside of CCRLS if you want to be the same. Now, I don't think we have those calculations. I see that I've done one. Bridget?
We have not, no. We haven't raised our prices for non-resident use in probably over a decade. And I know that was one way that we can, increase. It's not much. We get maybe 18 to 20 people a year. And the only reason we raised it is because the ebook charges have gone up.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a way to help with that inflation cost.
Yeah, it might be more of a rhetorical tool than a money raising tool, but it seems like it would be an important one. If we're going to continue to raise fees on something that we've asked people to, essentially pay for on the levy, we'd also be able to say, well, we've also taken a look at anytime we're asking people who aren't part of the tax base. Now, we tried it with the kickball, I guess, and it didn't work. But this, at least, people have to give us their address to get a library card.
Yeah, I think regardless, it would be a good number to know, right? Just in general.
I agree with Paul. So I have like more kind of specific events. So are you recommending for the large events at Minto Island, and this screen is the perfect one, Minto Island Conservation Area Stewardship, large event exceeding 1,000 participants. your city staff is recommending $1,000. Is that, I can't tell from that screen if that's an increase over the existing fee or not.
That is the current FY 2026
Oh, okay, that's easy.
adopted fee.
Okay,
So the $1,030 would have been the 3% on top of that per the methodology that Matrix was using. So that the $1,000 just keeps it at its current FY 2026 adopted fee.
okay. I'm surprised they wanted to leave it to $1,000 for over 1,000 participants. That's a bargain. I mean, I would love to hear, I mean, from our consultant, doesn't that seem a little low, Kushbu?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. I think that's one of those those components where, again, if, you know, there's kind of a cost standpoint, but then there's also from looking at it from the from kind of the market standpoint of, does that make sense? Like if you were going to rent a private space, you know, and renting a private space for 1,000 participants, you would be paying a much larger fee. So it's again one of those components of, you know, what are the different amenities included? What's the benefit to the community, and kind of what's the benefit here to the city? So it's looking at all of those intangible plus tangible components. So yeah, I mean, it definitely looks like a bargain, but it's also one of those things of, you know, what makes the most sense from the city's standpoint for administering it as well.
Well, okay, I just feel that's extremely low. I mean, I don't know how to put it differently, so I don't want to be a broken record. I mean, when I think of the large events of over 1,000 participants, how many of those events do we have per year? Do you recall?
And what are they?
Yeah, that was
What are
gonna be
they?
my question.
Ironman, World Beat. Is that what we're talking about?
Are those?
Maybe not even World Beat, since it's not a riverfront. Or since.
Is it races? Is it mostly foot races?
I'm curious,
Jennifer?
do you have examples of a couple of those?
So the conservation area, it's not something we typically rent out as a rule of thumb. We're only allowed by the federal contract that we have, because it is a conservation area, to be able to have 3 types of events larger than 1,000 participants per year. So typically those are runs that transpire in there. So Ironman is an example of that, probably the most pronounced example of that. And so really, when you're looking at something like Ironman, they're paying for all of the different event areas to which their participation is happening. So they're paying for the conservation area because they're running through there. They're also paying for the Jerry Franks amphitheater. They're paying through all the other areas of event areas in Riverfront. So when you look at that in totality, and but what we're limited to by the federal contract, for us, the $1,000 seemed reasonable because it's in conjunction with other larger scale events that are happening that they're paying fees for.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, apparently the entry fee is $300 to $400 per person, and they have thousands of athletes participate in this, and they get the entire Minto Island Park for $1,000, and then they get Riverfront Park for a pittance more. I'm sorry, but this is not a low income population. This is not an equity barrier as I see it. And to me, our consultant said earlier, exclusivity is a factor. Only 3 organizations can have the privilege of this event per year. And we're still giving it to them for a song. Like, you get to be one of 3. So there's a lot of exclusivity involved.
Well, I think the other thing to consider is that if you were to take a look at their entire cost recovery bill, it would probably include time for the police, time for, and so like, I've seen the cost recovery bill for the event downtown, the parade, $15,000 to hold that event over the course of, 3 hours. So I think probably this number only tells a portion of the story.
Sure.
Especially for something like Ironman. I guess I don't disagree in terms of like that number feels pretty low, but I think it's probably not the single check that they're writing to hold the event.
I mean, the nice thing about this discussion is that we have time. So maybe what we can do is we can bring back an example of events that have utilized this fee and holistically what they've been charged across all the areas.
Yeah,
I don't disagree with you. If we can only charge 3 of those, it seems a little bit low, just for the access, but let's get some real examples.
No wonder they want to come back.
Well, I think to that point though, I mean, I was thinking about this too, just in terms of the report that we got during the budget season about the softball tournament, right? That a 10-day softball tournament created $9 million in economic impact. And so some of these fee types we talk about as subsidy, right? We subsidize children's sports because not everyone wants to go to CFC and, you know, become messy. Some just want somewhere to play, and so we charge them $45. And it increases access. But the softball tournament, this is like a form, the fact that we don't charge them, do we charge them? We want to now, but some of these we don't charge full cost recovery, but the money that it brings into the city is something that we can say, this is a version of economic development for the city. Because by not charging full cost recovery, we entice more people into the city to use our facility rather than Gresham's. And they spend their money here rather than, you know, Tualatin Valley.
I agree that, yeah, we want to be competitive, but that's why we hire market consultants to tell us what can we charge that doesn't drive away business. I mean, how much can we charge Ironman for them to still keep coming back? That would be the question I would ask. Because you're absolutely right. These are, every time Ironman comes to town, it's a huge economic boom. I've met a number of the athletes, and for the most part, they're affluent people who have the privilege of flying in for this event. And they might go wander off into wine country. They, you know, one person I talked to, he and his entourage were going to go to Bend for the weekend. It's great. And there are lots of benefits to folks who may ultimately contribute property taxes to the city of Salem, but many will not. But knowing where that magic number is, that's what we hire people for, so that I'm not randomly guessing at what would be a suitable event before we lose that. For softball facilities though, how many other places can hold a softball tournament realistically? How many of them have that many tournament suitable facilities? You mentioned Gresham. I mean, I don't know.
There's
I just
actually
think
quite
something
a
to
few, and
consider.
it's pretty competitive.
I know every time I get in an airplane, I'm like,
Yeah,
oh
I
my
know
God, there are
nothing.
so many baseball fields in this country.
For former life, I was in that area, but
No kidding.
Yeah.
We could maybe look at other cities that host Ironman and look at their fees and see kind of like in comparison to ours, kind of what other cities that they're going to, how they charge.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a suggestion.
I mean, not every event is worth putting under the microscope, but I feel like this is one of those 3 that might be worthwhile taking an extra close look at to make sure we're accounting for the things. And we love having them here. They've been great tourists. You know, I haven't heard about bar fights breaking out amongst the athletes.
Didn't they sign a 10-year contract?
I don't know. Well, in that case, haha, no, I'm just kidding. I think it was maybe, I don't know.
It wasn't 10.
Oh, I feel like
Yeah,
it
it's
was,
5, 3 or 5.
years, I guess.
yeah.
Says our informed member of the public.
Mhm. I don't know, that was just something that really stood out to me. Other than that, I mean, I don't think there was anything that really. For Center 50 Plus, I'm not sure I'm understanding. Holistically, is staff recommending raising fees for Center 50 Plus? Is that what we're going to see in your proposal?
It depends on the fee. I think that the methodology Kushbu sort of laid out, there's no exception to the fee that we recommended. Now, I will note that a lot of the Center 50 Plus fees in particular, we didn't really look at because they're contractual. And so I don't know if
Yes,
Marilyn
right.
wants to go in detail on what that means, but
No, I understand.
yeah.
So I get it. I mean, we know that a lot of low income seniors use Center 50 Plus, so I want to be mindful of that. One of the easiest ways to check to see, are you a low income senior or not, is, are you a participant in their free lunch program? If yes, then it would be, I think, relatively simple to see which fee structure they align with. But I know I don't run Center 50 Plus, Marilyn does, and she does an outstanding job. But that you can't tell when people walk in the building what their ability to pay is. You cannot tell by how people are dressed. Some people, the way they're dressed can be very misleading, and that's not how we should be making assessments anyway. But I'm just curious to see, because I do know it's a lifeline for a lot of seniors. And how you thread that needle is why you guys and why are paid the big bucks, so.
Marilyn, did any fees that you can recall go up significantly?
None of ours went up significantly, but we did make a change this previous year and added the in-city, out-of-city fee of $30. The reason we made that decision to move forward with that was that it's not uncommon for senior centers to have a membership type of schedule. And so looking at the market of the other two centers in town, that was within the framework of that to do a cost recovery for that. Many of our classes are taught by contracted instructors where they lead the pricing. We have a 60-40 split agreement. And then we, as a Medicaid contractor, Medicare contractor, Northwest Senior Disability Services, those fees are set by those agencies.
Thank you.
I did want to just add that we do have a fee waiver program. And because many senior services are not established by income, they're actually established by age. So even a free or reduced meal program doesn't necessarily always, is not always the precursor to things. So we do have a fee waiver program.
Thank you.
If I may, I think we're hearing a little bit more about large events that utilize Minto and kind of the holistic view of that, out of resident library cards, and kind of what that cost would be. Are there any other areas that you'd like to hear more about?
I'm guessing your consultant took this into account based on the way she displayed factors, but I just want to make sure we did. When someone reserves a desirable location like Riverfront Park for a Saturday in the middle of summer, there is an opportunity cost to not renting it to many others who want to use it for that. There's only so many weekends in the summer. There's only so many nice days in the summer. Are you recommending a fee structure that takes into account the fact that, Riverfront Park is a lot more appealing on the 4th of July weekend than it is on, the last weekend of November?
Or during the week.
Or during the week, right? And also if we rent out to someone, and I think I've talked to Kathleen Swarm a little bit about this, that if you were to charge someone the nonprofit rate to just black out one of the most important weekends of the year, and they take over Riverfront Park for the entire weekend at the nonprofit rate, you're missing out on what that full rate, corporate rate, or whatever rate you want to call it, that you could have charged to somebody else. And there are pros and cons to that, as I can imagine. But those are just some of the things I'm wondering if you guys took into consideration before you bring your proposed fee schedule to us.
Khushbu, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, there is a certain amount of that when we're discussing it with staff, but that's more kind of from the fee setting standpoint, which is why for some of the fees, when we looked at the park fees, even though like the cost incurred by the city is not very high because the cost is just the fixed factors we can identify, there is that reason for the city continuing to increase or charge a higher fee than the cost because of those intangible factors that you just mentioned. It's a little bit hard to put an exact number on that opportunity cost. So, which is why we can't, unfortunately say, oh, there's like a 10%, factor for this, because depending again on who's renting that space, what's happening with that space, that factor might change so much from situation to situation. So rather than kind of coming up with something arbitrary like that, the study itself only gives the number based on kind of the actual costs incurred. But then when we talked with staff about, what are the implications of that and kind of where and how to set fees and what level of cost recovery to look at, it's why it was decided that for a lot of these park spaces, the fee would kind of continue to increase because it's trying to capture that additional component that's hard to give a number to.
Thank you. And, I think my final just observation on this is that I feel there's a big difference between a person or an entity who wants to rent out a space for free and not charge tickets, and a space that absolutely intends on charging tickets. So I think, like sometimes people just want to rent out a space to throw a party for their membership or whatever. But sometimes it's a money-making opportunity for them. So again, that's when I wonder, like, if we're only charging a tiny amount for some of our facilities and they're making a ton of money off of that space, I just wonder if that's appropriate. And from an equity lens, I would be interested in seeing what the rate is for people charging tickets and those who just want to host a free family-friendly event. Like I think Family Building Blocks hosts its Family Fest every year at Riverfront Park. It's a 100% free event. I don't think they charge anyone anything. And it's a really wonderful opportunity for the community. And I think incentivizing stuff like that makes a lot of sense. And that's a far different cry than the other events where they charge good money for the privilege of being there.
Kelly?
I just wanted to mention, there is in the fee schedule a distinction for the parks for certain days of the week. So Fridays and Saturdays are more costly than during the work week. There isn't so much during the summer times. We didn't divvy it up that way, but there's definitely some distinction during the week. And I know there is also a fee for Riverfront specifically regarding if you're kind of doing one of those kinds of programs where you're charging a ticket. Those are more costly, whether or not it's to the amount, but I know that Jennifer had taken that into consideration in building the fee schedule at some point, so. Good job, Jennifer.
Councilor Tigan?
Thank you. Before we close out, I just really want to take a minute to look at specifically at pages 18 and 19 of the report, sorry. The neighborhood recreation and sports camps.
Sorry.
These are importantly a money loser for us, right? We do not get full recovery by design for these programs. And I'm certainly curious to hear the suggestion from the consultant about accelerating cost recovery if a project isn't getting its target, like we're gonna go 10% every year if it's not meeting 35%. I would be concerned in the case of this area in particular, if it's, losing as much money or losing as much money, we're spending as much money on it as we think. That we would see a drastic increase in those charges out of the gate. To me, I feel like this is a place where we need to, cost recovery is not the objective of this program. And I don't think we should try to put that, problem solving effort upon it. So I'm curious from your perspective, if these are in that sub 35% category, are they gonna see a suggestion that they get up to that 35% in a hurry?
I think if we may, maybe we can bring that back and talk about it specifically. I'm mindful of the 10 minutes we have left.
Oh, sure.
We have one more agenda item. I think that's a really good question because that's really the policy question, right? Is where that, how much is subsidized and where and for what kind of services? So I think that's helpful feedback.
Yeah, to me, this is just like there was a pyramid somewhere. Either this is the very top of the pyramid or the very bottom. I can't remember which one, but it's not in between. It is super clear to me.
Enough that a person is committed to attending the event, but not enough to preclude them from attending.
Yeah, I think we need to keep the cost of these services as accessible as possible. Especially for the next 5 years.
And I agree with you. So are we moving on then to continued business and performance audit program date?
Yes, please. I'm going to turn it over to Tammy. Welcome, Tammy.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me again today. Today we wanted to revisit our conversation from a few weeks ago. So I'm going to go ahead Share my screen. And then, all right, I think you're seeing the right thing now. So we're just going to revisit this and see if we are ready to approve a program now that we have some of the questions that we discussed in May answered around the levy, which is great news. Congratulations. So that's what we'll be doing today is just a quick review of what we talked about in May and then talking about our options for this upcoming performance audit program. So just as a reminder, this is what we were looking at for this fiscal year: enterprise leadership, the urban renewal agency performance audit, and risk management. That risk management audit, we're actually reviewing the draft report with the city this week. So that one's on track to be able to wrap up by the end of the fiscal year. And then these are the priorities that you all had talked about for last fall. So last fall, when we had this program prioritization discussion, this is what the committee determined was a high priority at that time. So we have accomplished the enterprise leadership performance audit. The IT performance audit, we started scoping, and then due to leadership changes in the city, we've put that on hold for right now. We also put the fire department overtime study on hold because we heard that we wanted to make sure that we were able to capture data related to the EMS transition and how that may or may not be impacting overtime, which you'll see incorporated into our program recommendations for the committee's discussion today. These were the areas that were considered medium priority last fall. So again, we have the URA, which we were able to complete. We had a police overtime study and then a parks performance audit to be able to look at workloads, community service, staffing levels, etc. And these are the other medium priorities that you all had at that time. So risk management, which again, we're already working on, and then code compliance and planning. So in talking about this upcoming year's program, just as a reminder, this is the criteria that was used last fall for that program prioritization and can be helpful if we're thinking through today's discussion. So we wanted to prioritize those areas that were primarily funded by the general fund to make sure that this work is having a good impact to be able to demonstrate the city's use of its general fund dollars and to make sure that it's using those funds as efficiently and effectively as possible given the budget constraints at the city. Looking for those efficiencies and cost savings opportunities, we use the overall program budget and employee count as sort of a proxy to be able to estimate the volume of those potential opportunities. It would be great if this project had enterprise impact. It was obviously aligned with the council's goals and priorities. It could have a negative impact on the city as a whole if it was to be impacted, disrupted, degraded, or it was mandated by law. And then, of course, we wanted to consider that organizational readiness. And that's, of course, why we put the IT performance audit on hold. So this is just the list of projects that are remaining from that prior list. And I will come back to this slide. So it's just a summary of everything that was on that prior slide that we haven't yet discussed. But I wanted to move forward with being able to facilitate some discussion around the recommended priorities that we have worked with city management on to be able to present to the committee for your review and for your discussion. So based on recent events, we were considering the library for a performance audit. This performance audit would be specifically looking at service delivery strategies, looking at things like hours of operation, the staffing of those operations, programs, services, and be able to just understand, well, what's going on with those areas? Are there opportunities to be able to enhance that based on the community's expectations? And also to take this as an opportunity to look at performance metrics that the library has or could have to help communicate its performance and its services and impact on the community given that the levy has passed. And we want to make sure that we're able to provide good information back to the community about how those levy dollars are being used in future years. We would do a similar activity with parks. That was a performance audit that was listed previously as a medium priority and was anticipated to potentially come into this year's performance audit cycle. So we would also look at the efficiency and the effectiveness of their operations, given the community service expectations that exist for their work, and then look at those performance metrics in the same way that we talked about with the library. We would also recommend the fire overtime study. We absolutely hear the committee that we want to make sure that there's at least 1 quarter, if not 2 quarters of data following the EMS transition to incorporate into that report. So this would be approving the project while understanding that we would not necessarily start the project tomorrow based on that approval, but that it would be approved for the next fiscal year. And then we have a TBD for the committee. So if something is calling to you, we can certainly add that into this set of priorities and get the full year's program approved. If you would prefer to wait and have that be a discussion item that comes up in October or in February, we're also open to that. But I'm happy to go back to the prior slide that showed everything that was previously prioritized by the committee if you'd like to sort of see what some options might be or pose some additional options that are not yet on that inventory. So that is my presentation. Perhaps we could just start with getting a sense of these recommended priorities, if this aligns with what the committee would like to be able to work on in the next fiscal year, or if there are modifications that you would recommend.
My initial reaction is that the library and parks super important, and also there's some overlap there, I think, with our bond oversight committee, right? And like, we don't know what the charter of that organization is to know if they're also going to dive into the sort of operational questions that some of these pose, or whether it's just sort of like a budget committee version of the bond oversight. So my initial reaction is it might be kind of nice to have one of those for the oversight committee to look at, 6 months from now after they get chartered, but we don't really know what their charter is yet.
But I also feel like for the library in particular, it was and continues to be so important to the community as a whole. If there are recommendations that could be made to make it more efficient and better, then I would love to see the library.
And we would also, I apologize, you're so small, it's hard to see, but I would also just indicate that we would be happy to also take a presentation of these audit reports and the reports themselves to that bond oversight committee once they're complete.
I don't
change what we're saying bond oversight committee. I think we mean levy.
Sorry, levy.
Right, yeah.
Sorry.
I had no idea what you were talking about. I was frankly saying, am I?
Levy oversight.
It's like, you know what? It's me.
Levy oversight.
It's me. Thank God. Thank you.
She's so literal.
I am very literal. And we know this.
And we love that about you.
It was just an oversight on his part.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Love it. I know that one of the factors that we've identified for deciding where we spend our consultants' money and time and expertise has to do with the greatest opportunities for cost savings. So I'm very interested in overtime assessments for our 2 biggest ticket items on our general fund. 2 big factors: do they use general fund dollars, and do they use overtime? And what percentage of our budget are they? And police and fire are neck and neck for that. Okay, police is more. And also I know with EMS, it gets really murky for me because I know the whole concept is they're gonna have revenue streams that can offset, and we just don't know yet what that'll be. Nobody knows, nobody has that crystal ball. So I think overtime assessments for police would be helpful because they're not in the middle of such a transition. And I mean, if we saved 5% overtime in police, that's like an entire small department's budget. right? I mean, it's a big cost. I do want to commend the city staff because I think they're already finding ways to reduce overtime for the police, so it's not as if they are being unwise with how they spend it. I think they're already working really hard on that and it shows, and I want to give them credit for that. But again, they're our single biggest item on our general fund budget, and if there are even a few tweaks that can be made there, we could see some significant cost savings potentially.
Anyone else have any thoughts, and what are you looking for from us today?
I think we're looking for a recommendation for what goes next and the timing. Chris and I did meet with importantly, we met with the fire chief and he was okay with the fire overtime beginning in October. Right now would be a really bad time with the EMS transition, but he felt like in October, they'd have a quarter under their belt. So by the time I finished, they would probably have for 2 quarters.
I think they
Yeah,
agree.
so just from a staffing perspective, I think with the fire, even if we start in some, so we're looking at kind of the timing wise. With the levy oversight committee coming in, we would like to have some kind of a way to give them the performance metrics and so that they can kind of monitor about the progress of the community services. And especially with the accountability factor that we talked about during the levy campaign, I think it's important that there is some kind of a structure that we give them to the oversight committee. So going with, in that order, going with the library first and then going with the parks next. And I don't want to overload staff with too many audits at this point. I think kind of makes sense with so the library, so what we were thinking, library first and then fire, I think we will be ready in October. We'll have, by the time, Baker Tilly does like their analysis, we will have the next 3 months of data. So 6 months of data is good for the analysis piece of it. And then we go with the parks is what we were thinking from timing perspective.
Anyone have any thoughts on that? Do we need a motion?
Yes, preferably.
Is anyone prepared to make a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion to accept the city manager's recommendation and do them in the following order. Library, fire starting October 25 and followed by parks.
Do I have a second?
Oh, may I clarify?
Sure.
Parks would follow after October, is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, after the fire department is done.
A second?
I will second.
All in favor? Aye.
Yeah,
And if there is nothing else, do we have no new business?
Not today. The only thing I will say, is it okay that we'll come back in October and just double check timing and get something else in mind behind it? If that's okay.
Our next meeting is scheduled for July 21st. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
We do have a